Welcome to another episode of Tell Me Exactly. I'm your guest host, Bobby Benton. I'm filling in for Meredith Jensen, and I am pleased to tell you that we have a special guest with us here today. We have a gentleman who started back in the 80s working at 911 centers while going to college from North Carolina in Johnston County 911, as well as UNC Chapel Hill Police Department's 911 while going to college. He came on as a deputy sheriff in North Carolina, worked his way up and became director of Johnston County 911 Center. Also, through his career, he is a former past president for the NENA and a recipient of Dr. Clausen's annual award. He has started with Priority Dispatch and has worked his way up now, currently recently promoted to vice president over client operations. So it is my pleasure to welcome Jason Barbour. Nice to have you, sir.
Bobby, it's great to be here. It's hard to listen to all of those things. That makes me sound really old, especially when I started out in the 80s, but I'm still young at heart and still enjoying what I'm doing.
That's what makes it happen. Being young and at heart, age is just a number.
That's exactly right.
Well, with you being with Priority Dispatch for a long time, is that correct?
Absolutely. I started out in the early 2000s. Priority Dispatch was courting me, if you will, to help them build a police protocol. So I was one of the original instructors to help get the police protocol off the ground back in the early 2000s.
So you're like the OG of the police, is that right?
You could probably have been called a lot of other words, but you could say that, absolutely, Bobby.
Okay, so tell me exactly, Jason, how did the Police Priority Dispatch start up? When it started up, and exactly, we might have some listeners out there that don't know exactly what we're talking about when we say Police Priority Dispatch System, or we know it as EPD. Could you, first of all, tell them a little bit about what it is and when it started up?
Absolutely, Bobby. So let's roll the clock back to 2000. Back then, in our 911 center in Johnston County, we had deployed the EMD protocol, the Emergency Medical Protocol, and had it for several years. Because, Dr. Clausen launched EPD way back in the 80s and maybe even was working on it in the 70s as well. So the EMD protocol had been around probably close to 20 years by then, and, it worked great. We enjoyed it. It did great preparing our staff in the 911 center to handle a medical call. And then as I got to know some of the players with Priority Dispatch back then, as my role as the director, I was asking them, you do a great job providing me a tool to answer medical calls when they come into the 911 center, but you don't give me anything to handle fire calls, and you certainly don't give me anything to handle law enforcement calls. And Bobby, you realize in any 911 center throughout the U.S., an overwhelming majority of the call volume is police related. Medical second, and fire is a close third, if not switching both of those two in terms of which one's second and third. So I was a huge proponent. Every time I saw, some of the PDC people at trade shows, like, I need a police protocol and I need a fire protocol. So finally, back then, the salesman, Ken Windward is his name. He says, all right, you've put the pressure on me enough. We're going to do it, but we need your help. So off I went out to Salt Lake City to headquarters, which was at a different location back then, and went through the instructor training to teach version 1. And have been with it ever since.
Version 1?
Version 1. When we left the instructor academy, this was before PowerPoint. We had the 35 millimeter camera slides, projector slides.
Oh, wow. Just even carrying that from place to place would probably
that was a challenge.
Task.
That was a huge challenge back then.
Oh, man. Well, I tell you, you seem to have a passion for this, Jason. Can you tell me why it means so much to you?
Absolutely. Sadly enough, I lost my partner September 11th, 1995, in part, not 100%, but in part due to the 911 center at that time not having a structured protocol to follow related to law enforcement events. And the telecommunicator at that time just simply forgot to ask a very important question that may have changed the outcome of that. And it was supposed to be my call for service, and Deputy Paul West was my co-worker's name. He took the call for me, and it didn't turn out well. He lost his life in line of duty death. So it didn't take long for me to realize we needed a structured protocol to address any type of law enforcement event, fire event, and medical event that came into a 911 center. And as being the 911 director since 2000, I've seen a huge need for structured call taking, which we can talk about later on in this. Yes, that was my driving force.
And that's not saying that that was a bad call taker that took that call. It's just,
Absolutely not. And in fact, I still talk with her today. She still, is very upset about the event, as we all are, and is a huge proponent for structured call taking.
I know that now with the version that we have now out with EPD, we're like at 7.1 and about to go to 7.2. Why do we have so many versions?
So the police protocol, just like medical and fire, is a living protocol. It is constantly changing as things change in society / a 911 center. The way we processed a call back in 2000 is extremely different now in 2026, just as it is in fighting fires, responding to medical calls, and responding to law enforcement calls. There's change. I know public safety hates change, but it's inevitable. And these protocols can never be, if you will, completed, because they have to adjust as things adjust in society. And one of the ways that we get these edits, if you will, is through our clients staying closely in contact with us through a proposal for change feature that we offer for all of our protocols. So, a user sees that a question is no longer working like it was intended to be several years ago, or an instruction, or a different type of call is coming into a 911 center that the protocol hasn't thought about addressing. That's why these protocols are always evolving and changing.
And I imagine just like with anything that's new that comes out, even if it's not a law change or something like that, we come to realize some things just don't work and or needs to be tweaked, per se.
Absolutely. Go a few years back, we never heard of an accelerator stuck in a vehicle and needing some help. That didn't happen that often. As technology has changed in vehicles, a few years ago, it became an issue that 911 centers were facing. And that's the reason, once we realized that, we needed to make that edit to the police protocol. In fact, we've added it to all 3 protocols, so no matter which protocol a call taker grabs, in this heated moment where someone's calling 911 and their vehicle accelerator is stuck and they need help, that's a huge advantage of our protocols now that we have that feature. And we're dealing with electrical vehicles now. And directions on how to get out of a vehicle trunk if you happen to be trapped in that. So as things change in society, the protocols have to change with it.
And a lot of time with our call takers that we have, they might not have experienced anything, or might not even be like mechanically inclined as far as like with vehicles and
Absolutely.
things of that nature, and they need instructions, right?
That is exactly correct, Bobby.
Oh, now with EPD, I know that there's been a lot of controversy or a lot of issues with the previous version of EPD. Throughout the versions and the changes that's been made with EPD, can you tell us a little bit about that?
So I implemented version 1 in Johnston County and survived. Version 1 was our first effort at a police protocol. And the version we have today is extremely different. When we built the police protocol, we built it using what had worked for priority dispatch, i.e. the methodology and the structure of the medical protocol. And it didn't take us long to realize that just did not work in police call taking. In other words, processing a medical call is extremely different than processing a police call. And one way, among others, is medical calls are pretty much clear-cut. Somebody's calling you about a medical condition. It may get worse or it may get better, but it doesn't normally drastically go in a completely different direction. Whereas in processing law enforcement calls, they are very dynamic. They can be changing at a moment's notice. So once we came to that realization as a Police Council Standards, the group that's responsible for maintaining the police protocol, we realized we had to break the mold and go back and re-look at the police protocol with a different set of lenses, not an EMD lens, if you will. So today's protocol is extremely different and is continuing to grow. I would say some of the major changes that happened around 2022 is when we released version 7.0. That was probably the biggest rewrite of the police protocol since its conception. And some of those changes is we realized that we had to give agencies some flexibility and allow some optional questions and optional instructions that are referred to as jurisdictional questions and jurisdictional instructions to be added to the police protocol. And now in 7.1, we have over 300 optional questions that an agency can make a decision, I don't want that question in my operation, and they can turn it off. And we have somewhere around the neighborhood of 50 instructions that now are optional or jurisdictional, that if the administration at that 911 center doesn't feel like they want that instruction provided to their citizen, they can turn it off. And this has led to a huge acceptance of the new rewrite of the police protocol. Because remember, I've been teaching it and implemented it since version 1, and we did have some issues until we rewrote it in version 7, because again, we were using the model that had worked very successfully for the company, and that was the model of how we built the EMD protocol. So I would look to see further enhancements to that direction, because the way you process a law enforcement call in Johnston County might be drastically different than Atlanta, Georgia. But the way you process a cardiac arrest in Johnston County and a cardiac arrest in Atlanta, Georgia is probably very similar. So once the Council Standard got a grasp of that concept, that's when we started allowing more flexibility and more optional features in the police protocol, and our users are starting to embrace that.
That sounds wonderful. I mean, I can relate to that, to the fact of being on the other side of the radio and coming on this side of the radio with the center, and what I'm doing now, it's a totally different world. The call takers and the dispatcher wear multiple hats in the 911 center, and they've got a lot on their plate. And from what I've looking at the police protocols and throughout the development I came on in version 5, and just the changes is astronomical.
Yes.
And it helps eliminate the fact of our call takers putting on their investigative hats.
Yes. So that's sometimes an issue that new police protocol users have to grasp with, is the EPD protocol is a dispatch protocol, because most call takers employed in a 911 center are not trained or sworn law enforcement officers. So when you have call takers starting to cross the line, if you will, and start questioning and having a dialogue with a citizen in an area they're not trained nor hired to do, that creates a drastic liability for not only the call taker but the agency. So the police protocol does make a very big effort to try to keep call takers in the dispatch side of the line, if you will, and not cross over into investigation and helping the officer write his or her report. Now that's a culture shock sometimes for new users, because maybe the call takers have spoiled some of the officers by crossing that line, not realizing the liability they're creating for themselves as well as their agency. So this is a dispatch protocol to help call takers make sure they gather 4 priorities that we have for processing any law enforcement call, and that is, number 1 is officer safety. That is our first priority. And number 2, which is a close second, is your caller's safety. And then the next priority is, let's ask questions to help the responder know as much as they can about suspect information, description, location, if they're in a vehicle, direction of travel, what's the vehicle look like. And then the 4th priority of processing any call in EPD is, what other information do I quickly need to be able to ask to help the officer respond with as clear a picture as I can paint through the radio.
It's interesting how you put it into priorities, being officer deputy safety first, and then, the caller. Most people think that law enforcement main objective is catching a bad guy. You know, and don't get me wrong, when I was an officer, I loved to catch the bad guy. But, you know, I think through your experience, you probably can agree that there's been times whenever we'll stop a chase because it's not safe for everybody else.
Absolutely.
Or if we see a car strike a pedestrian and take off, we're not going after them. We're going to take care of that pedestrian. We'll catch them later.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, you know, having been through a line of duty death, it's something that we and the protocol wants to make sure we can mitigate to the fullest extent to keep someone from having to experience that if it could have been prevented in the call taking process.
Now, I don't know if you can speak about this or not speak about this, but what are some changes that might be coming about that we should get excited for?
I would look for a drastic increase in the optional questions, the numbers of optional questions, the number of optional instructions, and enhancing the police protocol with some unique types of calls that are starting to come into 911 centers. Like, you know, one that we've added in the recent years is an ATM alarm activation. Bobby, we didn't have that kind of alarm activation when we were in the trenches. We didn't have ATMs.
About to say we didn't have ATMs.
So it is a very popular type of alarm that's hitting 911 centers, so we've had to add that set of questions to the police protocol. And, you know, as well in the alarm card, recently we've had to add a set of questions when an alarm monitoring company is monitoring a vehicle. You know, throughout our history in the streets, alarm companies just monitored structures.
Yes, sir. Yes,
But now some of them are starting to provide that same service for a vehicle. So the protocol has had to adapt to that and add that to the protocol. So I would look for, you know, we're getting a lot of good feedback from our users about the changes they would like to see in 7. And I would look to see in 26, hopefully, several great enhancements are coming to the next release of police.
With that at hand, too, there's been previously, I don't want to say bad mouth about police, but why do you think people, besides what we talked about, should give it a chance? The ones that, whether they've had it before or haven't had it before, but why do you think they should give it a chance?
Well, that's a very good question, Bobby. And again, having been teaching since version 1, and having been a contractor to help agencies implement for the last 15 years, in addition to the protocol being rewritten, if you will, in version 7, we as an implementations division have changed the way we implement new clients. Prior to this change, we used to recommend that agencies leave every option on when they went live, and that's where that perception of 100 questions of death came from previous users, and I agreed with them. And we drastically increased the number of options in version 7. You know, by then I was director of implementation, so I had a little bit more opportunity to change the way we did things, if you will. So I had our implementations division to do a 180. Starting with version 7, on all new implementations, we would recommend that agencies go live with the least amount of these options turned on, so brand new call takers didn't experience the 100 questions of death. It's a lot easier if you go live with the least amount of questions and instructions on. It's number one, it's a better experience for the call taker. It's a better experience for the citizen. But if you do, as a manager, have a call taker come to you and say, look, the earth's going to quit turning if I don't ask this question, it's a lot easier to go into our administrative tool, one click, the question's back on, than them having to experience full bore sets of questions and instructions. And then once you go and turn it off, your first appearance or your first impressions already happened, and it's kind of hard to forget what it was like the first time around. So we've seen a tremendous feedback since we changed that philosophy and had the new protocol in place of agencies really starting to embrace police. We have had several clients that had a previous version that had turned it off. We have had them come back and take a look at the new protocol, and once we educated them about our philosophy of how we implemented police changing, they gave it a second look. And to my knowledge, I don't think we've had any agency that turned us back on turn us off. They're very happy and they see the changes. And one other thing I want to point out, Bobby, that we did to change things in the implementations is now when a client buys police, before we are ever on site doing any type of kickoff meetings, kickoff planning, we now offer the client a EPD management class. And what that is, it's the same EPD class that the troops get, if you will, but we encourage the agency to bring decision makers to this management class, and we provide them with the forms of all the different options that are available to them. And as the instructor goes over each protocol or each chief complaint in the police protocol, we ask the people in the class, the management class, to just make a quick jot of their opinion, whether we should turn it on, turn it off, or how we should define that definition. We don't discuss it there, but it will already go ahead and introduce them to the police protocol and all the new options they have. So when we're there doing our kickoff meetings, we're having educated and informed discussions with the client about how they can customize the police protocol for their operation. And we've gotten a huge appreciation for that new step.
So it gives them the foundation to take away from the classroom and go back, and before priority dispatch comes back in, and they have a knowledge of working. Have you seen that has worked out a lot better when it comes to the kickoff?
Hands down, 100% better, if not more.
Well, awesome. So all these changes come about were needed.
Absolutely. And there's still more changes that are needed because we're, as I said again, the police protocol, the fire protocol, or the medical protocol will never be on its last version.
Well, that's just great. Jason, I want to thank you for coming and joining us. It's always a pleasure talking with you, sir. And I look forward to the next time that we can get together and do this again.
Thank you, Bobby. It's always great to spend some time with you.
Thank you. And for our listeners out there, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, give us a 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts. Let us know what you did like. Subscribe and be sure to follow us on our Instagram, our Facebook at Tell Me Exactly. To get the latest on all things emergency communications, you can visit our website at tellmeexactly.prioritydispatch.net to submit questions for our experts to answer. Tell Me Exactly is a Priority Dispatch Corporation podcast. It's developed by our team of protocol experts and is regularly hosted by Meredith Jensen. I'm Bobby Benton, serving as a guest host with Cody Ekman as producer, Reading Roberts as sound engineer, and Scott Robertson and Jason Barbour as executive producer.